We're gonna subject you to something that's a lot better use of time. You're finally gonna learn what Marxism is from Prager U, unless you have some disagreements. So we'll see. But I think
I'm all ears. I want to know what Marxism is. Let's hear it.
Why does anyone still care about Marxism? Karl Marx has been dead for well over a century. Everywhere Marxism has been tried, it has left death and destruction in its wake. In fact, nothing in the last 1,000 years comes close to the amount of tyranny, terror, and mass murder brought about by Marxist regimes.
Just real quick, this guy looks like a younger clone of Prager, like they have
with slightly more charisma too. I mean, just, he doesn't quite have that job.
They genetically modified him a little bit. Or an AI bot. I agree. All right, so tyranny.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you were to sit there and be like, Siri, show me a conservative, that dude's picture would like pop up almost immediately.
All right, tyranny, terror, mass murder. For some reason, those words they go well together with his image. But all right, let's see what he has to say.
Yet Marxism lives. It may present itself today as postmodernism, multiculturalism, feminism, environmentalism, or critical race theory, but it's still Marxism. So there must be good reasons why it has endured, even flourished in the face of unremitting failure. Say what you will about Marx the economist. He was a master psychologist. He recognized that there are many people in every society who are motivated by envy and resentment.
Two different fields.
Marx speaks directly to them. He tells them that the responsibility for the misery in their lives belongs to the capitalist system. If we can just get rid of that, he promises, we can eliminate poverty, inequality, exploitation, class conflict, war, and alienation. Not a bad list if you're looking to start a revolution. But there's more. Marxism assures us that this socialist utopia is close at hand, available to all, not in some distant future or in the next life, but here and now. All we have to do is overcome one little obstacle: human nature. Marx expressed his deepest views on this subject in his economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844. They can be summed up in one phrase: the enemy of being is having. In other words, the desire to own things makes you a bad person. However, you're not to blame. The blame belongs to capitalism. The most common interpretation of Marx's philosophy suggests that he opposed capitalism because it creates an unjust world of inequality, exploitation, and class conflict. Marxism, according to this view, is all about equalizing income and social status. This is true, but it doesn't go far enough. Marx saw the accumulation of material wealth as dehumanizing. The more money and material possessions one acquires, the more estranged one is from his true humanity. And what was that? In the philosopher's socialist paradise, one gets to eat, drink, and go to the theater free of charge and without having to earn a living. Best of all, you get to do it without the guilt of being a moocher. All you have to do is enjoy yourself. Or, as Marx put it, you can do one thing today and another tomorrow. Hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, and rear cattle in the evening. Yes, rear cattle in the evening. That's how in touch Marx was with reality. But who cleans out the sewers, does the dirty jobs that keep a society functioning? Ironically, in the evil capitalist society, the sewer cleaner freely chooses to take on his job. In the socialist paradise, coercion is almost always required.
Wait.
So, all right. I feel like he's kind of laid out the beginning of his case. So, Matt, are you on board so far, or is there any errors that you can spot so far?
Oh, there are a lot of errors. I just have to say though that everything that he's proposing sounds pretty dope to me. I mean, I'm not particularly inclined to want to rear cattle, but being able to go to see the movies for free, fuck yes. You know, I mean, I'll even go see fucking the new Transformers movie if it's free.
Yeah. Didn't Marx want to move to Texas and be a cowboy?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of fits in with his, with his cowboy aesthetic that he wanted.
I mean, I think to take it at the risk of taking it seriously, there's there's like two things going on here, right? One is like, is it impractical to live in this kind of society? And two, is it undesirable, right? Like he's saying to get material goods without work is itself a bad thing, right? Even if you could, right? So I feel like there's two strains there that he's kind of combining with scorn, and that's something that I find objectionable to begin. Like they're two different questions in my opinion, but I'm curious what an actual scholar, more things that are wrong. I mean, we don't really have enough time to say everything that's wrong, but some things.
Well, I think one of the things that's really telling is this conviction that Marxism is really predicated on ressentiment or envy, right? Which is a very, very common argument that the political right will roll out, not just in this context, but pretty much any context they can think of. And there are people who make this argument more effectively and less effectively. Jordan Peterson makes it a lot less effectively. Mark Nietzsche makes it very effectively in some contexts. And my response to it is always to say, look, if you were to throw a rock at a DSA meeting, then yeah, you'd probably find some leftists out there that's motivated primarily by resentment, right? That just wants to eat the rich, guillotine them all, and the more blood that flows in the street, the happier they are. But I can't think of any leftist organization that I've been a part of where that's the primary orientation, right? Very often, the way that leftists tend to conceive of what it is that they're doing is much more in line with what he gestures at, but doesn't really take seriously, this notion of justice, fairness, giving to people what it is that they need in order to flourish. And there's all kinds of ways that you can connote that without suggesting it flows very deeply from ressentiment or envy. The other thing that I often point out whenever I see this argument put forward is that people who make it very often don't acknowledge the fact that the people who are in positions of power and have enjoyed a lot of status in society very rarely acknowledge the fact that a lot of their inclinations might be motivated by ressentiment. But it's very, very clear today, if you look at the political landscape, that it's hard to understand something like Trumpism without understanding it as a very much a resentment-driven form of politics, right? Except that the resentment that you see on the political right is usually very different than what you will sometimes see on the political left. It's much less, I've been denied this over the course of my entire life and I'm entitled to it, so give it to me now. Or at the very least, you shouldn't have it if I don't get to have it. What you see on the political right is far more often this idea that, I can't enjoy what it is that I have if I know that you have it also. Or at the very least, I can't rest content knowing that you're getting something that I didn't also receive, even if there might be good arguments for why it is that you should receive these things. And you saw a very good example of this with Biden's plan to eliminate student debt, right? There were some conservatives out there who would say things like, yada, 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 bad for the economy, it will raise the price of school, yada, yada. But the number one thing that you saw online was people saying, I had to pay for school. If I had to pay for school, then these poor kids should also have to pay for school. How is that fair? That even came from extremely rich people who came from very affluent families like Ben Shapiro, by the way. And what else is that but a kind of ressentiment, right?
Yeah, and I think that I think you usually see straw manning or just picking out the worst of any group. I mean, I think all sides do this, right? So I think so what I was thinking is like when they were talking about people who blame all of their problems on capitalism and not just the fact that like human existence can be painful. I think that those people actually do exist in the left to a degree. And I think that's a critique I would make of the left as well. But when you're painting an entire intellectual tradition by psychologizing it with like one fringe or one strain of something that arises in leftism, which I think, it makes sense that if you spend so much time talking about how the system could be better, you could mix in your own personal problems with that system. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't want to sit here and say that nobody like this exists, but I think it's a ridiculous characterization. And like you said, it's to say that like resentment and envy drives the left specifically as opposed to other sides of the political spectrum is a pretty ridiculous assertion.
Yeah, and they're not even hiding it all that much any longer. So in 2020, around October, I think it was, the National Review ran an op-ed arguing for Trump, but not really argue for Trump in any way that we consider particularly rationalistic. The headline for the op-ed was "The Only Middle Finger Available," and the headline is pretty self-explanatory about what the argument for Trump is, right? Vote for him so he'll stick it to the people that you hate, right? They'll cater to your animosities, right? So I'm like, if you want to sit there and chastise people for giving into a ressentiment-driven kind of politics, then by all means, you can criticize some of those eat the left of the rich types on the political left. I have my own inclinations in that direction, but I do agree that if your primary objective is we need to guillotine as many people as possible, I'm not really going to be on your side. But then you should 100% be turning your attention to the people who will say things like, the big reason to vote for this guy is he'll stick the middle finger out to everybody that you happen to hate. And yeah, he might drive the country into the abyss, but at least he'll take them down with him. So,
yeah. All right, should we see what he says about coercion? Because obviously the sewer cleaners are doing it 100% from their own free will, and it's not because if they don't take any job, they will not be able to eat or feed their family. So according to Prager, let's see what they have to say.
Marx never bothered with such messy details. He left that to others. Unfortunately, those others always turn out to be megalomaniacs, like Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Castro, Pol Pot, and Hugo Chavez. They were the ones who brought Marx to life and in the process caused tens of millions to suffer and die. Contrary to Marx's claims, work freely chosen brings both money and dignity. Furthermore, most people work best when they pursue their own self-interest, an idea Marx despised. To him, self-interest turns everyone into Ebenezer Scrooge, greedy, grasping, and unfeeling. Not only is money, that is capital, inherently corrupting, but the acquisition of it can't be done honestly or fairly. The rich got rich by exploiting the worker. For Marx, there's no other possible explanation. For many today, there is no other possible explanation. For these people, Marx offers a philosophical justification for their anger, even their rage. From generation to generation, the formula never varies. Only by bringing the privileged down can the underprivileged be brought up. The venom that pours out of Marx's pen stems ultimately from the fact that reality wouldn't conform to his worldview. It never seems to have occurred to him that people are complex beings with different talents, ambitions, and desires. It may be more accurate to say he didn't care. If people wouldn't conform to his worldview voluntarily, then the state would just have to use other methods of persuasion, like murder and terror. It all made sense to the philosopher as he toiled away in a corner of the British Museum.
What's particularly stupid about that is Marx, more than almost any other socialist in his time, was aware of just how differentiated people are. In fact, I was getting into a Twitter discussion about this the other day. People can take a look at it. One of the things that really comes to the fore in his critique of the Gotham program is he's very critical of social democrats who say, well, in order to establish a good socialist society, all you need to do is distribute wealth equally. So give to each person the same. Now, there's a certain kind of crude appeal to that. But then Marx goes on to say, listen, people are very different in terms of their inclinations, their natural talents, their disabilities potentially, so that if you were to give everyone exactly the same, the result would be tremendous amounts of inequality, right? So this is why it is that we need to think about these questions in a more nuanced way and eventually move towards a system that rewards people not on the basis of what can be considered equal, but based upon what it is that they need, right? From each according to their ability to each according to their needs. So for a professor who apparently is their go-to guy to criticize Marxism, not being aware of one of Marx's most famous pamphlets where he launches his most influential criticism of egalitarianism is really shocking stuff.
Museum or in his squalid London apartment. What is astonishing is that millions came to believe him. What is tragic is that millions more suffered and died because they did. What is scary is that millions continue to believe. I'm Brad Thompson, professor of political science at Clemson University for Prager University. In a remarkably short period of time, the philosophy of Karl Marx changed the course of history.
He's back.
At the height of its power,
He's back
half
quickly.
the world fell under its dominion, kept there by a combination of fear, terror,
the sequel
and
nobody
brute
asked
force.
for, but everyone's going
Then
to enjoy
suddenly, in the late 1980s, it imploded. By all rights, this should have been the end of Marxism. But it hasn't turned out that way. From environmentalism with its rejection of free markets to critical race theory, which sees white patriarchy as the source of all evil, you'll find Marx.
All right, we're going into new content. Also, I think this guy sounds a bit Canadian, so I have to say, I don't know. He hit that out pretty hard. I don't know if that could just be Midwest.
Well, we do have a tendency to produce kind of hackish right-wing figures from, Jordan Peterson through Lord and Southern. I mean, don't blame Canada for that.
Yeah,
a lot of things to blame Canada for, but not that. But it wouldn't surprise me.
So before we go on to the next part of the series, which is just the same guy talking about the same shit, I guess it's like 3 videos probably coalesced into one. The one thing I thought is interesting to touch is he was saying that Marx believes that the sewer cleaner needs to be forced to clean the sewer, right? And he didn't back that up, But I do think that this is something that some people aren't really clear about when they think about or people who don't completely understand Marxism. And I know there's different strands of thought, obviously, but what would you say, Matt, about the idea that under a socialist system that's Marxist, that the only way to get people to work is coercion or forcing them to do it?
Well, it's interesting because there's a lot of research in Marxist circles on exactly this question right now, particularly because of the resuscitation of interest in Marx's, it's usually called Republican theory of freedom, right? So the Republican theory of freedom basically holds that you are more free if you are not subject to the domination of another, which basically means you're not subject to the will of another person, their arbitrary or capricious will. And seen from this perspective, Marx would point out, look, there is obviously a circumstance where one could say that state coercion or state compulsion to do something that you don't want to do constitutes a very serious infringement of your freedom, which is, of course, why he would be very critical in many respects of the Soviet Union, Maoist China, you name it. But it's also very much the case that billions of people under contemporary capitalist conditions are subject to the very arbitrary and capricious whims of people that they have very little opportunity to actually respond to in any meaningful way. And anybody who doesn't understand that has never lived or never worked in a workplace that has a crappy boss at its helm. So Liz Anderson wrote about this very effectively, but she points out, look, if you were to go to any contemporary workplace, what happens? 8 hours a day, most of your waking life, really, you're told when it is you can go to the bathroom, when it is you can eat, who it is that you can contact, what it is that you're going to do, how it is that you're going to produce. And then all the labor that you produce is expropriated by you, sold by another person, and you're given a wage and told that if you don't like it, you can go to another firm where pretty much exactly the same kind of conditions pertain. And Marx's point would be, look, that's very much a kind of domination, right? For most of your waking life, you have very little say over even these very intimate kind of life processes, like who do I talk to, when do I go to the bathroom, what kind of language do I use when interacting with people, and that's a very serious problem. And it's a pretty compelling argument for why it is that we would want to change the relations of power that exist within the workplace by establishing more democratic forms of economic organization.
All right, let's see. Let's see. I always like when they make the jump to the other forms of Marxism, like racial equality and stuff. So let's see what he has to say.
Marxism at its root. The leaders of Black Lives Matter, for example, openly acknowledge their devotion to Marxist ideology. How do we explain this fascination for something that has so utterly failed everywhere it's been put into practice? We can find answers in one of Marx's most enduring epigrams. From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. Marx was a poor economist, but a talented journalist. The only actual job he ever had.
Wait.
He knew how to turn a phrase.
Didn't he say he was a good economist in the last
But
video?
what does this slogan even mean?
No, he kind of
According to what
implied that he was a
ability?
crappy economist, but he was a good psychologist. So he's a good psychologist. He's a good journalist. At the end, he's probably going to say that he's a good philosopher. So Marx would be talented at pretty much every academic endeavor and every literary endeavor except economics by the end of it.
He did great work by his patients. He got them on. He really improved their mental health.
According to what need? And who determines anyone's ability or anyone's need? Marx never bothered to answer these obvious questions. He had much bigger things on his mind, nothing less than the creation of an entirely new kind of world for an entirely new kind of human being. Marx believed that by altering man's economic and political institutions, He could alter,
because
or
there's
even
nothing
better,
new about
rewire the
capitalism,
human
right?
brain. He
There
could
we go.
conjure a
No, yeah,
new
economic and political
consciousness
institutions
that
just
would
fall down
Yeah.
from heaven and they're given to us, and we
Yes,
have no choice but to accept them.
capitalism didn't radically reshape the world that Marx was living in over the. All right, so I just wanted to freeze on this image because this is.
I do love that image. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Dr. Marx, paging Dr. Marx. We need a brain massage.
When I became a socialist, like 6 or 7 years ago, by reading just like different random dirtbag leftist tweets, this is what was happening to me. Basically, this was the image of them reaching into my brain and making me a leftist.
It's
Yeah, I
Matt
don't know if
Crispin.
you.
Matt Crispin
Right.
was doing the massaging of your.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know if you know this, but when Jordan Peele was writing Get Out, he was actually deeply inspired by Marxism. So
replace the old false one. This new man would be less selfish and acquisitive and more altruistic and communal. In short, he would be a superior type of man. Of course, this new man could only reach this goal if he wasn't preoccupied with having to earn money. According to Marx, money and the pursuit of it ruined everything. Marx hated money, maybe because he never found a way to make it. Getting rid of it was central to his worldview. Once a person's subsistence, one's daily bread, was distributed on the basis of need rather than greed, man's natural communal affections, long suppressed by his capitalist overlords, would be renewed. This is Marx channeling the 18th century French social thinker Jean-Jacques Rousseau, one of the few people Marx admired. According to Rousseau, this is what you must do if you want to create a new society. He who dares to undertake the making of a people's institutions must feel himself capable of changing human nature, of transforming each individual who by himself is a complete and solitary whole into part of a larger whole from which the individual receives his life and his being. Understand this, and you understand not only a key feature of Marxist thought, but the dark history of the 20th century. Marx took Rousseau literally.
I want to get into Rousseau quick, but Matt, you are either Christian or had a Christian upbringing, right? Much. I'm Jewish, but like,
Yeah.
I just really wonder how these guys, like a lot of the main Bible verses, right? Like Matthew 6:24. I'm looking it up. I didn't memorize this, but no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. I don't understand how, supposedly these Christian nationalist people, present like the pursuit of money as something that's like actually really holy and what you should be doing, as opposed to this like evil Marxism. Is there no tension there? I feel I honestly have trouble understanding how they put forth this argument.
Oh yeah, I mean, and you can see references to exactly this kind of point throughout the Western canon, in quotation marks, right? Well-known critical race theorist Aristotle once was very critical of people who possess kind of inquisitive natures, because he pointed out that, listen, money is just a means to an end, and so any society which prioritizes making money as an end in and of itself has become inherently perverted and unvirtuous, right? Now, that doesn't mean he was opposed to certain kinds of economic activity or for making money if you had some kind of higher aspiration for it. But this was very central to his critique of certain kinds of economism very, very early on. And Marx is highly indebted to many of these lines of thinking, right? In fact, one of the things that's really interesting about his work is that of all the classical philosophers that he singles out for praise, Aristotle is the one that comes up most frequently exactly on this point. Now, he chastises Aristotle for not recognizing that one of the reasons classical philosophers could be critical of trying to make money is, of course, because they lived within a slave society. This mode of production was invisibilized, so they could have this kind of hoity-toity attitude towards labor and acquisitiveness because, somebody was doing all their work for them. But he does take this idea that transitioning to a society where the pursuit of money becomes an end in of itself is a very bad thing, or at least a very damaging thing, seriously. And in that respect, he falls within a long tradition of auspicious thinkers who held exactly the same kind of points.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious. I don't know. This one just doesn't pass the sniff test. The idea that becoming obsessed with money and material goods doesn't have some kind of corroding effect on one's soul is, I think, just kind of one of the more ridiculous dogmas of capitalism. But anyway.
No, and I should say this is also related more generally to his theory of freedom. So it's something that we should talk a tiny little bit about, right? So one of the things that's interesting about Marx is the fact that he continuously stresses how it is that the social relations that human beings create are then reified by them and perceived to be natural or immutable. And then this in turn imposes certain kinds of imperatives upon people that if they recognized as their own creation, they could change if they wanted to. But since we don't recognize them as flowing from the forms of reification that we instantiate, we're not able to actually change them in any meaningful way. And the reason this is important is, of course, he says that under capitalist conditions, we have to understand that the kinds of unfreedom that emerge in our society aren't natural, and they certainly aren't inevitable. They're the kinds of things that humanity imposes upon itself. And it takes the form of this kind of alien capitalist totality that's perceived by us to be imposing its imperatives upon us, when really, if we stopped investing it with this kind of power, then it would cease to be able to do so, right? And this is one of the things that's so problematic about money for Marx. It's not that he doesn't understand the functional role that money has to play as a medium of exchange in a capitalist system. It's just that by prioritizing the accumulation of money over other kinds of human endeavors, we are perpetuating the reification of the capitalist global totality and the forms of unfreedom that are associated with that, rather than recognizing that if there are various forms of unfreedom that emerge under these conditions, it's within human power to change it.
Yeah, and I mean, all we have to do are watch. This is a good time for you to come in, Ben. But all we have to do are watch family movies from the '90s, right, to see the too many husbands are spending too much time on their giant business phones as opposed to, pursuing, who've become obsessed with money and business over their family to understand this point. But then we're about to do the jump into like racial Marxism and stuff, I think. So
Yes.
Yeah.
Human nature had to be returned to its allegedly pure, selfless state before capitalism, with its Enlightenment and Judeo-Christian values, corrupted him. But creating this new man would be a formidable task. Marx anticipated that many would object, especially the owners and managers that had a large stake in the capital.
Ben, we do have to say you missed an animation of Marx literally opening up the man's brain and brainwashing him, and there's like a Tim and Eric like squish effect that like the sound that of like when someone takes like pasta and like mushes it around, like that kind of effect. So that's why the guy has like bolts in his head, because his head comes. Just that's important context to understand what's going on.
I do love also how like the Monopoly Man made a cameo in this.
System.
Yeah, I also two things about this. Just from, look, I'm sure I'm missing lots of context. I missed the first half of it, and they probably laid out a whole rigorous and convincing intellectual framework that would make sense of everything they're saying right now. But just two quick thoughts. One, a phrase that you are never going to find anywhere in the voluminous collected writings of Marx and Engels is "new man." That's not in there. Search for that one in vain. I think about the closest that he comes is some of the stuff about species being, where his point is that people are not free to sort of pursue their own kind of self-directed creative projects in life, because they have to hustle all the time to make their daily bread, and that that'll change for the better under socialism. But really, where is Marx saying, oh, actually people are going to be great, or never mind, like that's the goal, right? That it's like, oh, I'm really concerned that people are just too personally immoral. The thing that I really want above all else is to create better people. I think this kind of focus on individual morality or what's going on in individual souls is sort of the very much the opposite of what Marx was interested in, focused on. So that's one point. Second point is it is just kind of hilariously anachronistic. You're talking about 19th century writers to use this phrase Judeo-Christian that like nobody anywhere used until the mid 20th century.
Yeah, well, you missed one big thing that you didn't know is that Marx is a terrible economist, but he's a great psychologist and a great journalist as well. So it's a lot of damning with not even faint praise, weird praise. But anyway, let's
2 out of 3 talents ain't bad, right?
2 out of 3. Yeah.
We'll watch a few more minutes.
Friendly persuasion wasn't going to get the job done. Only the ruthless application of state power would be up to the task. Marx was all for it. Private property, wage labor, competition in profits, these would have to go. The state, now run by the workers themselves, the dictatorship of the proletariat, as Marx called it, would control production and pricing. It would wisely manage the economy, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. And imagine how wonderful it would be. No more ego, no more self-interest. Instead, everybody working for the benefit of everybody else. Peace, love, and harmony. For many, it's a very seductive idea. Who wouldn't aspire to live in such a world? Look around, a Marxist might say. The powerful exploit the weak, crushing the majority's noble aspirations, your aspirations, just so they can have more. It's unfair and unjust.
It is kind of funny that
How much better if we just
that
start
video
over?
looks exactly like the professor giving that video. Can you go back a second? Yeah, right there. Just doesn't it look exactly like the professor?
Yeah, I was gonna. Okay, you know what? You're right. That does look like him.
They definitely have the same barber. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say it looked like a artist rendition of John Roberts handing down one of his anti-labor rulings for the Supreme Court. But yeah, there is like really so much wrong with the last couple of minutes, but just to pick on a couple of the big things, the dictatorship of the proletariat, sounds scary because it has the word dictatorship in it, which we associate with like rule by a single person. Although if you hear the rest of the phrase of the proletariat, right, that's pretty clearly not what's meant in context there, right? I think that means like rule of the working class. That the working class majority of society is, taking charge and is sort of, calling the shots temporarily. Like the analogy is to like a dictatorship in the Roman Republic, where it'd be a temporary thing, and then they'd, go back to something else that is sort of like stepping in to take charge of things, to reorganize the economy, in the interest of getting rid of classes entirely. Marx is the only time, and Marx and Engels actually very rarely use this phrase. It only shows up a few times in their writings. They don't say very much about what they mean by it, but they just about the closest that you ever get either of them to explaining exactly what they mean is to say, oh yeah, look at the Paris Commune. This is this is like the closest thing that's happened to this dictatorship of the proletariat we have in mind. And the Paris Commune in 1871, at the end of the Franco-Prussian War, like basically disgruntled workers and soldiers and artisans are taking over Paris. And that was not a dictatorship in the sense they're talking about at all. That was ultra democratic. They made every state official recallable by the constituents at any time and for any reason, limited maximum salaries of any state official to the average salary of a skilled worker, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just weird. And also this thing about the critique, that line they always like quoting from the critique of the Gotha program, from each according to their abilities to each according to their needs. That's not like Marx is suggesting that some all-powerful committee use this formula to apportion goods. The idea is that in an advance, he says, okay, in the earlier phase of socialist society, you need to apportion consumption according to what people are putting in production in order to incentivize labor contributions. but but in the but in a really advanced socialist society that automation under capitalism puts people out of work, but on automation under socialism when workers are controlling the means of production could just mean that there was less work to go around, and eventually maybe there's so much less work that needs to be done by humans that people can just kind of pursue their own projects without you having to tie it to consumption, and enough people's passion will be computer engineering or whatever that'll that like what work needs to be done by humans can get done that way, and there'll be enough to go around that people can just kind of take what they need. And there's a perfectly legitimate argument to be had about how realistic this is, or whether we're ever going to get all the way there or whatever. But like, it's just this, look, I don't want to impugn the academic integrity of Prager University, but I don't know. I can't help but thinking this is somebody who might not have carefully read the text that they're pulling that line from.
You think? Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, the way that I've typically understood that particular conception of distributive justice, right, from each according to their ability, each according to their needs, is in relation to his comment in Capital Volume 3 about exiting the realm of necessity and entering the realm of freedom, where in his mature writings, he makes it very clear that one of the ways that freedom should be understood is in terms of free time, right, the ability to engage in projects that are highly personable and that reflect our individuality, but our social individuality. And he also goes on to say in Volume 3 that one of the things that's going to distinguish a society of associated producers from a capitalist society, and all for that previous societies for that matter, that are oriented around class exploitation, is the fact that in a communist society or in the society of associated producers, we're going to see the development of human powers, or sometimes it's translated as the development of human capacities, as an end in and of itself for the first time, rather than exclusively as a means to the end of valorizing capital. Now, there are a lot of objections that you can make to this, just like you mentioned, Ben. How would one go about doing this? Is it realistic? Will we ever reach a position where we're actually enjoying conditions of absolute, affluence, so that we don't actually need to adjudicate important questions about the distribution of resources? Sure. But this idea that what Marx wanted was some all-powerful state that's just going to give everyone exactly the same thing is completely ludicrous.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. What do we think? Is there have we plumbed the basic? Okay, let's do. I'm seeing Jake saying in the chat. Let's do just a couple more minutes, then we're going to cut it because there is other stuff we need to get to tonight. We can't look. I know everybody romanticizes their college days, wish they could just stay on campus forever, but we can't linger on Prager University all night. So just a couple more minutes of this, I think.
But we're so close to understanding Marxism, Ben. Just like 6 more minutes.
They can have more. It's unfair and unjust. How much better if we just start over, start clean? That's the Marxist socialist dream. In real life, it's a nightmare. Needs become demands, and demands become rights. The best are mocked, and the worst exalted. Innovation withers, while the government grows ever larger. Eventually, the productive become virtual slaves to the unproductive, and the society collapses economically, intellectually, and morally. And then the real horror starts. If you think I'm exaggerating, just ask someone who fled the Soviet Union or Cuba or Venezuela. For all its risk and inequities, they prefer freedom. And we should too. I'm Brad Thompson, professor of political science at Clemson University, for Prager University.
It's interesting also that for all the talk about ressentiment and envy that was the focus of the early video, it's very hard not to read a certain kind of ressentiment into this claim that there's a group of people who are clearly and demonstrably the best or the productive, and to have what they are entitled to be taken from them by people who are apparently less deserving of it. That's a deep wrong, and it's something that we should have this kind of sneering contempt for. I mean, if you want to start psychologizing people, maybe you should turn inwards and focus a little bit on that.
Yeah. I mean, this it was really weird, in a couple ways. I mean, I did like some of the animation was fun, but
the brain bit, yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Evil Marx.
The evil Marx in the sky when they started talking about society starting over was, But
I feel like tankies might really enjoy some of that imagery of based Marx almost shooting laser out of his eyes, controlling society.
I assume all you guys saw that DeSantis ad about how Trump loves gay people.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, which like the best part about it is if you're not super hooked into right-wing Twitter, you would think that was an anti-DeSantis ad.
100%. I actually looked at this and I'm like, man, this is like 10 years worth of like 4chan memes, just like blitzed together into a 2-minute pastiche. It's fucking amazing. Like I sat there and I'm like, every one of my postmodern conservative books that's sold as like an e-copy must now have this ad just like appended to it, being like, here you go. Just watch this and you'll get the main idea. Don't even read the book, just watch it.
Yeah. I mean, that like, because there's this sort of ominous, evil kind of like the final boss of the video game is coming out kind of music that starts with this stuff about how, all the headlines about, I don't know, Ron DeSantis, signs bill to, legalize throwing rocks at, gay, couples or whatever. Like that, again, you'd think it was very anti-DeSantis unless you're like, you spent too much time reading right-wing Twitter and that's like, no. That's like all the evil imagery. Like they literally have Patrick Bateman in the DeSantis part of the ad. It's like, yeah, that's the key, the code here is that all the evil imagery is based, right? So you could do the tanky equivalent of that ad where there's, society starting over. You have evil Marx in the sky. But yeah, it's like this idea that Marx is talking about starting over history from scratch, like really could not be more wrong.
Oh yeah.
Like this is this is the same thing Jordan Peterson in that, clip that we started with at the beginning of the show doesn't get. That in fact, a key difference.
Wait. Jordan Peterson doesn't get something about Marxism?
I would argue yes. I mean, obviously I know it's a hot take, but yeah. But when Peterson is like, oh, what's going on with the Communist Manifesto admitting that capitalism is super productive, right? The point that he's not getting there is the same one that the faculty at Prager U is not getting, that it's, like the whole point of Marx's version of socialism. In fact, one of the big things that differentiates it from so-called utopian socialism is precisely that we're not talking about a year zero, shaking of the Etch-a-Sketch, right? We're not seeing capitalism as just this kind of avoidable moral mistake, but rather saying that capitalism builds up these productive forces in a way that creates the possibility of something better. That if in other words, it creates the possibility of a version of materially abundant high-tech modernity that's not savagely unequal. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive postgames on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.